Hello and welcome once again to Joe and Toby Talk Snooker. This is our review of the Betfred World Snooker Championship 2021. A wonderful snooker-thon of 17 days have just passed us by, and it always fills me with sadness when I think back to it and have nothing to watch on BBC Two when I get in from work. But how do you feel about it all, Toby?
It's funny, isn't it? There's something that I remember. I did GCSE English, and well, I suppose like everybody, but they covered something called prophetic fallacy, and that was whereby the weather would match the mood. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, the weather has done its best to match the mood ever since the snooker's finished. There was lovely sunshine, and now it's finished. It is tipped down with rain every day, and that has practically, as you say, summed up your thoughts. It's a strange one, isn't it? It happens every year at the end. We get so excited, so enthralled by it, and I think I watched even more than usual this year. And then when it ends, it just fills a massive void, even though really it's only been 2.5 weeks, and it wasn't really a void beforehand. But it was a great tournament. You know, just to summarise before we start, I think it was a shock winner without being too much of a shock, if that makes sense. It wasn't the man I was expecting. He wasn't in my first few picks, but it wasn't obviously a massive shock with Mark Selby, if you didn't know already, being rank number 4, obviously going up to rank number 2 now. But yeah, I thought it was a great tournament, some great talking points, and obviously sit back, relax, and we'll be talking about those in the next 40-odd minutes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with anything that you said. It was a terrific tournament, and I agree with you. I watched a lot more than I usually do. Well, certainly since I've started working, it was great to see so much coverage on the telly. I think BBC have done a great thing of starting to show it on BBC 4 now, rather than just leaving it on the red button. It feels like you've got more coverage of it. But we'll talk much more about that later. So, back on the 17th of April, it seems like a long time ago, but again, it's one of those things that the World Championship does to you. But Ronnie O'Sullivan started out his defence of the World Championship and looking for his 7th world title, equaling Stephen Hendry, and he took on Mark Joyce in the first round. And overall in the first round, I think it's fair to say the seeds came out on top, and one of the non-seeds to get through was Stuart Bingham, who I'm sure we'll talk a lot about in this podcast. But he beat Ding Junhui 10-9 in the first round. That one, either which of the players could have been the seed there. So really, 15 out of 16 seeds go through for me.
Yeah, absolutely bang on. But that was a great match between, as you say, Bingham and Ding Junhui. Probably the pick of the round. I think we picked it out as our match that we were going to pick before the round. And it surprised me that so many seeds did indeed get through. I think there was 14, wasn't there? Stephen Maguire went out.
Yes, 14 out of 16, which I believe is a record equaling.
It's got to be, hasn't it? Yeah, it's got to be.
I can't remember exactly. I think there was a time in the 80s that it was 14 out of 16. It very rarely happens. And, Stephen Maguire was 3-0 up in that match as well. And, I remember you messaged me.
To you. Yeah, said it's all over.
Yeah.
Famous last words. Because I'd backed Jamie Jones to do quite well in this tournament. And, it didn't turn out that way. But, what a great performance from Jamie Jones. When you look at the other matches in the context of the other matches, for him to come in and steamroller Stephen Maguire 10-4, which looks like a very comfortable victory. Of course, we're saying he came from 3-0 down, so how comfortable was it? But overall, I thought that the standard in the first round was pretty good from all of the seeds. The likes of Kyron Wilson coming back from 5-1 down against Gary Wilson to come through that. Sean Murphy coming from, I think, 5-3 down against Mark Davis to overturn that one. And, just in general, the seeds played pretty well. I agree with that. Like you say, and like you allude to there were quite a few scrapes, as you say. Kyron Wilson, Sean Murphy, and then the big one of the round, I think, is John Higgins. He just looked like he'd completely gone at one point, and he came back. I think he was he 4-7 down possibly against Tian Peng Fei?
He was, yeah.
And he something just came for John Higgins, and unfortunately, it didn't lead to anything in the next match, which we'll talk about in a bit. But yeah, the Jamie Jones match was unbelievable. I don't think Ding's going out was a surprise, but the reason that we had backed a few of the non-seeded players, because there was a good lineup this year. Yes, there was, without sounding obnoxious to any of these guys, there were your Mark Joyces, there were your Liam Highfields, that I would say purely because of the level of opponent you would presume wouldn't get through. Guess you can add Kurt Mafflin onto that list, Sam Craigie as well. But you'd have expected the likes of maybe Ricky Walden, like we said, or Ali Carter, Matt Selt, even Mark Davis or Martin Gould to spring a surprise. And I think the truth is that there weren't really any surprises until that second round. And the Maguire one, although I said I fancied him, and funnily enough, I fancied him to get to the quarters, and look how that one turned out. But I wasn't too surprised by the Maguire one, really. I think if you were to pick one of the seeds to go out, he'd be fairly near the top of your list.
Yeah. And
then obviously Ding, really probably the top of your list, because nobody wanted to draw Stuart Bingham. Ali Carter went close against Lazowski and played pretty well, but as you say, it was pretty strong from some of the seeds. I mean, I'm seeing here 10-1s, 10-2s, 10-3s. Again, Liang Wenbo, would have expected him to maybe put a bit more of a fight. But in general, it was a really good first round for the seeds, which set up some really mouth-watering ties for that second round. I mean, when we saw it was Higgins against Williams, as we thought it would be. We didn't expect Tian or Sam Craigie to win, but when we saw that match, oh, what a match it could have been. But it really wasn't in the end, was it?
No, it wasn't. As you said, I've not seen as strong a second round for quite some time now. And I mean, Stuart Bingham and Jamie Jones in the non-seeded second round, that would be a decent match in any other tournament. But you look at this, Mark Allen versus Mark Selby, Neil Robertson, Jack Lazowski, Murphy Bing Tao, Hawkins Wilson. There was just so many matches that you could watch, and it was crazy that Higgins versus Williams was what we would possibly associate as tie of the round, but they were never the prime coverage on BBC, which is crazy to say. I think 13-7. Williams sort of pulled away in that match. Sort of midway through, and Higgins never really recovered. He did win, I think it was maybe 3 frames on the trot to make it 10-6, because he was way behind, but never really fully recovered, and 13-7 at a fairly comfortable victory in the end. But you look down all of the second round matches, and although they were mouth-watering prospects, I think one player very much got strong towards the end, with the exception of one match, and that was Ronnie O'Sullivan versus Anthony McGill, and that one possibly the most surprising of the round to go close.
Yeah, I think it was. I don't think we're being too bad here by saying that Anthony McGill hasn't really achieved anything too much since he got to the semi-finals here last year. Played against Ricky Walden in the first round. We probably fancied Ricky to maybe turn Anthony McGill over, but I have to say, I said to you afterwards that it wasn't really down to Ronnie particularly. I mean, he didn't play well in his match against Mark Joyce, but he got through comfortably in the end. But Ronnie played, well in most parts here. Yeah, had a few blips at some point, but ultimately McGill was just the better player. And it's some of the stupid comments of, well, the tournament's over now, and it's just a load of crap, to be honest, because the amount of solid players that were left, and I mean, to be honest, as you say, with Bingham and Jones, I mean, McGill and Bingham is still a really good tie, and actually, it was, not trying to push ourselves too far forward here, but McGill played well and deserved that result. So that was really where that first half of the draw started to open up, didn't it? Because Bingham went through to the quarters. You're suddenly thinking, and I certainly thought, I'll tell you what, Bingham might win this.
And he could well have done on another day, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
It was very interesting, that Ronnie and Anthony McGill match, because Ronnie was 4-1 up in that match, and then lost 7 frames in a row. So it was, which I think is becoming quite a common thing with Ronnie. He either doesn't start his match well, or it's the middle part of the match that he's rubbish at. That the end of the match seems to be when he plays his best stuff. And I think he just almost ran out of frames in the end. I think had it been a best of, first to 15, for instance, maybe Ronnie would have just pipped him at the post. But as you say, Anthony McGill played really, really well, and I actually seen a different side to Anthony McGill's game this championship. Going into the tournament, he was talking all the talk in a lot of the newspapers about how he thinks he can win the World Championship, and I'm sure all 32 players in the world's believe they can win a World Championship at some point, otherwise they wouldn't be playing the game. But there was something about Anthony McGill's comments that said to me he was up for it. He believed in himself, and hey, he proved it, beating Ronnie in the second round. And hey, if he'd beaten Stuart Bingham in the quarterfinal, which we'll get to, maybe he could have been the one to stop Selby in his tracks. But we'll never know, I suppose. But was there any other second round matches that really grabbed your attention when you were watching?
I think there was one massive one, and I think this was actually the shock of the round. I know it sounds ridiculous because he's a higher ranked player, but I don't think in a million years I'd have expected Shaun Murphy to go and beat Yan Bingtao. There was just something about that tie, and I know that you backed Yan to do pretty well in this tournament, and we cast a shadow of doubt whether Murphy would get past the first round, and he did, as you say, just about 10 frames to 7. But the way he played against Bingtao, he's been one of the best players for a year or so now as Bingtao, and again, we'll cover Murphy a little bit more later on, but I thought he played really, really well in that match, and I think that was where we saw all of a sudden, Christ, Murphy could be a contender here. I wasn't certainly looking too much at Mark Selby then over the other finalists because of the mountains he had to climb, and I know that sounds ridiculous with Shaun Murphy facing Judd Trump in the next round, but I thought the way that Murphy was playing, he could have beat anyone, and he's just that kind of player, isn't he? He's very much hot and cold. But as you were talking about Ronnie there with losing a lot of frames in a row, I don't think he's the exception to that. I think any player can go through that, so it's not just Ronnie, and it's not, Ronnie's finished and Ronnie's bottling it and all that crap that people keep coming out with. It's just snooker, and it just, at the top end, I mean, how many of the top 16? Well, 14 of the top 16 were in this, obviously, with the 14 seeds getting through. So anybody in that top 16 can win umpteenth frames in a row. So, it's not a surprise, really. So I guess Murphy Bingtao was a surprise. We've discussed Higgins and Williams. That was a surprise, but in some ways not so, because Williams just plays a game that's completely opposite to Selby, and the way that Selby he can just blow anybody off the table. But in the quarter-final, when they did match up the two marks, it's fair to say that the Sat-Nav's game was a bit better than just go for it all and, all or bust Williams. It was an incredible result. I mean, after he beat John Higgins 13-7, to have gone and lost 13-3 to Selby, it was just like, honestly, come on. It was... It just felt like Selby had got through so easily to the semi-final after that.
And I wonder how much that actual session off helped in the end for Selby. Because of course he won it with a session to spare against Mark Williams. So we'll maybe get back to that later. I've not really thought about that until now. But you have to say, if John Higgins got through against Williams, he probably wouldn't have got beat 13-3. But I think by the end of the match, Williams was just sort of given up, I think. Which goes along with Williams's doesn't care attitude, which is what Ronnie's had for many years and had a lot of success with. But it was a little bit of a disappointment for that match to be so one-sided. I think we were both of the opinion that whoever won that match had a a terrific chance of actually going and winning the thing. And Williams just wasn't quite up to it for one reason or another. Another player that surprised me, actually, just before we fully move on to the quarterfinals, was Dave Gilbert. After the torrid couple of seasons he's had since reaching the semi-finals, he was really impressive in round one, and had his chances against Trump. 13-8's a fairly comfortable victory in the end, but it was just nice to see him playing well again. Moving into the quarterfinals, we had Anthony McGill versus Stuart Bingham, of course, William Selby, which we've talked about. But on the other side of the draw, two very, very intriguing matchups. Neil Robertson against Kyron Wilson and Sean Murphy against Judd Trump. How did you see that going before a ball was played?
Well, to be honest, I think that the Murphy-Trump match, you'd say, it was fairly likely that was going to go the other way. The Kyron Wilson-Neil Robertson match, you'd expect it to go the other way, and it didn't. It's as I said, Sean Murphy's played really well. I don't think it was any particular detriment to the way Judd Trump played, to be true.
No.
He did. Murphy won that 13-11. It was just a case that he was the better man. I just think some people can't accept that, you can win a match or you can indeed lose a match and just say, well, the other player was better. Especially over these lengths of matches. I get it in a best of 5 situation or best of 7 because you might not get the run of the ball. But over a distance of that much, Murphy played really well. I'm a fan of Robertson's, as you know, and it's the same discussion every year. And he was one of the favourites. I think he was second favourite or third favourite to go and win it. And,
yes, he was. Yeah.
Although he played well against Lazowski, he did. He played well against Lazowski. It just didn't happen for him in the quarters, and Kyron Wilson took advantage of that. He's no fool. He had to really scrape through his first 2 matches. He had tougher draws than they might look, I think, Kyron Wilson, if you look at Gary Wilson, who again was another player who we thought had his best at that tournament a couple of years ago and wasn't going to do anything since. But he played pretty well. You say, Kyron Wilson did come back from quite a way down. But against Barry Hawkins, again, another tough match against a seasoned pro. But Neil Robertson just didn't have it. And realising that it was going to be either Kyron or Sean Murphy in the final, personally, it was a real shock, because obviously Judd Trump and Neil Robertson probably the 2 favourites to get to that stage. But yeah. I think before I'd have started considering Murphy and Kyron, I'd probably said Jack Lazowski or Yan Bingtao, to be true.
Yeah, no, I mean, I couldn't agree more with that, really. What I did want to sort of ask you about as a Robertson fan, and over the last 3 years, the people that have beat him are John Higgins, Mark Selby and Kyron Wilson in the World Championship, who are, for want of a better word, all the same type of player, really. Quite methodical. Not necessarily slow. I don't want to get too much into the slow play, but quite methodical and maybe slightly more tactical minded than just all-out attack, which I think Neil Robertson's game is. And when Neil Robertson is sucked into that sort of game, that's when he seems to come unstuck.
Yeah, I think you're right there. It happened last year, didn't it? Like you say, he played Selby last year, didn't he? And he just couldn't do it.
And he played Higgins the year before, and
I think you're definitely right, because I just watched that match and he just started to, like you say, almost stutter, didn't quite know what he was doing. So yeah, I think it got in his head. But for a world champion, albeit 10, 11 years ago now, and a player who's won that many events, it's just not really an excuse he can have, is it?
It's not.
It's not an excuse, and you're going to have to beat one of these top players to win the world championship. It isn't going to happen because of the way the draw is structured, but does he have to play a Sean Murphy to go and win, and get to the semi-final? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with, I look at the players that Neil Robertson has played and beaten at the Crucible, and I'd love to actually go back and look at the previous years, which we might do in a little bit. But, he's beaten Liang Wenbo, who Liang is one of the most attacking players that there's ever been. And then Jack Lazowski, who, of course, is an attacking player. So like-minded players, he's beaten them fairly comfortably. But then when he's coming up against the more tactical-minded players, he's becoming unstuck. And I'm just going to have a little look at 2020 here and see who Neil Robertson played. So he played Erzenbacher. He played Liang Wenbo last year in the first round.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And then Barry Hawkins, who, I would say is a little bit more of an in-between player. 2019, very quickly. He played Michael Georgiou, and then Sean Murphy beat him, and then came unstuck against Higgins. Go on, we'll go one more year just to see if this trend continues.
Well, he got it in the first round.
He lost to Milkins. Okay, so who's an attacking player, so that kind of goes against what I'm saying. But anyone's vulnerable in the first round. But it's
you're right.
I think you're almost right in a way that maybe Neil Robertson needs the perfect storm of playing a Murphy type player, a Trump type player, Lazowski, Mark Allen, something like that to win another world title. It's bizarre, but I'm growing tired of what he's saying every year going into the World Championship of I want to go in, play the right shot every time. I'm not going to be bogged down. But every single year he seems to be getting into these battles where he's not playing his natural game, and that's when he's getting beaten.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it was a very good season for Robertson, to be honest. He won the Tour Championship in the UK's, but I just think that World Championship's the thorn in his side. I think more than any other player, because since he won it, he got to the semi-final in 14. He's got to a few quarterfinals, 3 years on the bounce now, but he's not done anything significant at the Crucible, and I think that he'll have time. Time's on Robertson's side more than some of the other players, but nevertheless, I think that something's got to give. But it wasn't much of a shock because of what had happened in previous years. And again, it's nothing against Kyron Wilson. Kyron Wilson played well and beat him, but you would expect Neil Robertson to beat Kyron Wilson. Only slightly, but I think just not necessarily on rankings, but I think on success, etc., etc., and on the balance of it, I think you would expect him to beat Kyron. So, as I say, both of those matches at the bottom of the draw was a shock. We've talked about Selby absolutely steamrolling Mark Williams with a 13-3, but Bingham and McGill, they liked their close matches, didn't they? Goodness me, that was another decider. And again, I'm a bit of a Bingham fan as well. And the more the tournament went on, Bingham, I was rooting for Bingham the most. Definitely the last four, and he played so well against McGill, and it was going to be unfortunate for either of those players to come out of that to lose. It was one of those matches, but Bingham played so well, and it was one of those that you thought he's lost it, he's bottled it, then McGill's bottled it, and it's just horrible watching as a fan. That's why I like to watch it as a neutral. Don't have so many terrible heartbeats then, but no, it was a great match, and to be honest, it was probably I know this sounds obvious coming as a decider, but I think it definitely was the pick of the round.
Yeah, no, I agree. The Murphy-Trump match was good. I think until the final session, Robertson-Wilson was very good, but Wilson just went away. But you always felt that Bingham potentially had the better chance to beat Mark Selby than McGill, and I think that's more of just an experience. Of course, Bingham's a world champion, a Masters champion. McGill's not proven at that sort of level yet. So I, for one, wanted to see Bingham go through because I wanted to see a really good match against Mark Selby in the semis, and boy, did we get it. Moving on to the semi-finals, unless you've got anything else to say about the quarters. But
no, I'm just weeping at the fact that I've got to remember Bingham going out.
Yeah.
That's all.
I mean, it was a strange old match against Mark Selby. Bingham, of course, started very, very well, and then the evening session, I think, or was it it was the third session that completely changed the match, because Mark Selby was 9-7 in front, and Bingham got it back to 12-9 in front.
That's
and
right.
Then Mark Selby won the next two frames to go 12-11, and I think that's where the match changed. Bingham was on a roll. He was 5 frames away from the final, and only ended up winning another 3 frames from that point.
Yeah, but I think he still went into the final session at 13-11, didn't he?
He did, yes, but my point is, Stu Bingham was sucked into the Mark Selby torture in that evening session, and even in that very last frame, where he went 13-11 up. I think they had about 25 minutes on the playing snookers. Mark Selby was playing on for 5 snookers.
That's right. Because I went to bed at about 10:30, and I set it up to record to see what happened what happened in the last few frames. And I thought, an hour and a half. What's going on here? So I just fast forwarded it, and thank God I didn't watch it in real time because I'd definitely fallen to sleep. But I mean, it was a slender lead, and I know what you're saying, but Bingham was probably still the favourite going into that last session, I think, being 2 frames up.
I think he was as well.
But, it just didn't happen for him, unfortunately. It was a great session from Mark Selby of winning that one 6 frames to 2. But I think Bingham was one of the players of the tournament. It was genuinely a real surprise. I know that you could say, well, he had a fairly easy draw of it, all right, but that can be said for any player if they get the right storm, as you alluded to earlier. But he played some really good snooker, particularly against Jamie Jones. I thought he took that match by the horns, and
I think that was very close early on. I think it was maybe 5-all even in that match. So for him to come out 13-6, shows that he had a very good final session. I must admit, I didn't watch much of that match, but the semi-final, Bingham, of course, was on course to force a decider, and Mark Selby kept getting out of snookers and putting Stuart Bingham in snookers, or at least covering the easy pot. I know Stu Bingham was getting very, very frustrated about that, and there was some words exchanged afterwards about Mark Selby playing slowly and this, that, and the other. But what's your opinion on all of that?
It's funny because I'm in neither camp. I'm not in the camp of Mark Selby plays too slow, but neither am I in the camp that Selby's completely, I don't think innocent's the word, but it's the word I'll go for because I can't think of anything different. I watched pretty much all that match, as sad as that sounds, but I watched pretty much all that match. There was maybe 2 or 3 occasions where Selby took a few minutes for each shot, but as I think you've said, Bingham got sucked in and did exactly the same, and we know Selby's game. There is more than one way to play snooker. There's on the one spectrum, there's the Mark Williams way of you see a pot, you go for it and go for position, and if it doesn't go, then you give your player a chance. You've got that mid-stance, the kind of, I guess, John Higgins style, I suppose you could say. And then you've got, this Mark Selby style, which, it's funny because Mark Selby's style, when he wants to and when he has got an opportunity, he can almost play like Williams because he's not one of these players that will just roll up to the reds and only take on a pot that's safe. He will go for the aggressive pots, but at the same time, his safety game is sublime, and I just think people get a bit needled by that Selby's game is so good actually as an all-rounded player. And I think Steve Davis said that Selby's the best all-rounder that we've ever seen, and he's in some good company there. So I guess in response to your question, I don't really see it. I think what Bingham said was a little bit like what Selby said last year about Ronnie. It was just in the moment, and he'll come to regret that a little bit. But listen, I understand why Bingham's a little bit frustrated, but at the end of the day, he can pat himself on the back. He's walked away with a nice cheque for 100,000. I mean, that'll move him comfortably back into the top 16, and I just hope that Bingham doesn't do what players that have got to the semi-final in the last few years have done, and got to the semi-final and done big bog all afterwards. I really hope he can push on from here, because I think if he'd have won that match, we could be sitting here now saying that Bingham's a 2-time champion. But in credit to Mark Selby, he played so well and really, really deserved that, in my opinion.
No, it was a really good match. I think the only thing I didn't like was Selby celebrating before match ball. I know John Virgo definitely alluded to it in commentary, and I couldn't agree more with him. I thought that was a bit much. But, Stu Bingham had his chances, and, when he was 12-9 up, if he'd come out of that 14-10 maybe, I think, I agree with you. I think Bingham would have won that match. He was, personally, the better player in that match for me. I know Mark Selby played very well towards the end, but I was saying to you, I think Mark Selby's played too well in rounds 1 to 3. And he's wobbling now. He's peaked too soon. And he did wobble for 3 sessions of that match, but then, he came back strong when it mattered at the end of the day, and he got to 17 first. But that was a really good semi-final. What was, by the looks of it, a much more comfortable semi-final, but I think an equally intriguing semi-final for many reasons, with Shaun Murphy and Kyron Wilson.
Yeah, you talk about a wobble. Shaun Murphy, I think he has to take the crown of player of the tournament just for this. I mean, he won 13 out of 15 frames. He was 10-4 down at that point. I'm thinking, well, it's game over. And Murphy played some absolutely brilliant snooker. It's funny, isn't it? Because Bingham and Murphy are the two men you expect to either go hero or zero. They're nowhere in between. And this tournament, I guess, showed that again. But Murphy played so well. I feel a little bit for Kyron Wilson.
Yeah.
But I equally think that Shaun Murphy against Bingham/Selby was a better prospect. I don't know. I think a little bit maybe like Selby. Kyron had played very well in those first 3 rounds and might have struggled over the best of 35 like he did against Ronnie last year. So I was happy with the result, I have to say. But, Murphy playing well or not, there's got to be some sort of Wilson not playing very well to allow Murphy to win 13 out of 15. I didn't watch too much of that one myself, but if maybe you win 6 or 7 in a row, then sure. But 13 out of 15, it was either way, whichever way you look at it. I guess the most important point here to be positive is that it was absolutely sublime from Shaun Murphy. That.
Yeah, I mean, I actually watched quite a lot of that match. In contrast, and again, I think had Wilson won that match, I think he would have won the tournament personally. I think he was so determined to win it and to make better of last year's effort against Ronnie. And I think the only reason he lost last year's World Final was because it was Ronnie. I think any other player, Wilson probably would have won it. And now that's not me saying Ronnie played sublime last final. I don't think he did. I think there was parts of it where he played atrocious, but it's the aura of Ronnie. I think the fact there was fans in that match on its own, I think that all played into his court, and that maybe caught Kyron out a little bit. But this year he just had a steely determination about him. He was scoring super well. He was playing really well. But one thing that I've absolutely loved watching Shaun Murphy do this year is the fist pumps at the end of sessions. Not at inappropriate times. It's always at the end of a frame after a big pot, or at the end of a session, which I think is absolutely fair enough. And that got in Kyron Wilson's head. But not only that, Shaun Murphy played some of the best snooker I've ever seen in a semi-final, actually. And it was very akin. From 10-4 down, it was very, very similar to how Ronnie played from 16-14 down to Selby last year. Yeah. But it was just a barrage of long pots, high breaks, fist pumps. It was just a whole storm of things from Shaun Murphy. And that, somehow he won by 5 frames in the end. I mean, that is just absolutely insane.
It is. You'd have got good odds for that at 10-4 down, I could imagine. But I don't think I'd really add much more to what you've said there. I just think that, it was unbelievable. It really was. And that was just a shock. For Shaun Murphy to come through that, that 16, we would have probably been, probably in the first half of my list, but nowhere near the top. To beat Kyron Wilson, to beat Judd Trump, to beat Yan Bingtao. To beat that run of players. And then be the unfortunate sod that faces Mark Selby in the final.
I know.
You don't get a tougher run than that.
It's a tough one. And I think it's definitely the World Championship that got away for Murphy. It's his fourth final now, his third defeat in a row in World Finals, and I think he'll look back on this and think it's the one that got away, and we'll get more into the final in a bit, but both players' route to the final on paper was very, very difficult. Mark Selby, Kurt Mafflin, who got to the quarterfinals last year, could have been a potential banana skin, 10-1. Mark Allen, who could have beaten Mark Selby on his day. Mark Williams, who we said was one of the favourites for the tournament, one of the dark horses potentially. But in our eyes, we've seen him definitely featuring potentially in the winners' enclosure. And then a revolutionised Stuart Bingham, who's just come out of nowhere this second half of the season and is playing well again. And then on the other hand, you've got Murphy, who came through another sticky contest in round one against Mark Davis. Yan Bingtao, Masters champion, world number one Judd Trump, and then potentially the new big prospect of Kyron Wilson, who's a Crucible expert. So both players had a hell of a run to the final.
Yeah, absolutely. It was unbelievable, and it's actually quite nice, isn't it, for it to be like that, because you don't want people coming out the woodwork. I guess I don't know who an example could be, but if somebody goes late and gets through by playing players, and no, we're not saying that anybody at this tournament is poor, because to get to the World Championship through the qualifiers is an absolute nightmare, but to get into the top 16, it's tough. So. It was incredible how tough a run those guys got. It's just I was just so shocked. I know that you get a shock every year, but I think honestly, all four of those players were a shock to get there. I thought that we didn't have any of the class of '92 there. I mean, for Mark Williams to be the last one standing in that regard was
very rare, isn't it?
That's a big shock.
Yeah.
It was just such a shock for a lot of good big players to drop out. So not necessarily so early on, but I think by so many seeds getting through into that second round, it just brought everybody so close together. Didn't give anybody an easy run. I suppose you could say maybe Stuart Bingham had the easiest run of the lot to the semi-final. Because
slightly,
of Ronnie O'Sullivan going out.
But then he had Ding in the first round.
Exactly. His first round was horrible. First round was horrible, yeah.
It's such a tough one. And I almost completely agree with what you're saying about it being a shock. But it's the world number 4, 6 and 7 and the 17th seed, in Stuart Bingham. For the tournament, at least. Of course, he wasn't top seed in qualifying, but I think it was Zhao Yulong was the top seed and he didn't qualify, so Stuart Bingham was the top qualifier to get through. So it's very interesting, I think. That we see it as a bit of a shock, but I think potentially we looked at the routes to the final and didn't plot those four players to get past the opponents that they did, but hey, it happened, and it was one of my favourite finals to watch, actually. It was probably the first time in quite a while that I've watched all four sessions very intently. Work commitments or, just general bank holiday shenanigans sometimes prevent that. But, and of course last year it was in the summer, so... it was an interesting final, and I just want to say these stats to you. Okay, so session 1 was 5-3 to Murphy. Session 3 was 4-all. Session 4 was 4-all. So where it went wrong for Sean Murphy was that second session. And that's where the final was lost, and I find it very interesting that I also think that's where the match was lost for Stuart Bingham, in that evening session before the final day of the semi-final. So it's those late night moments at the Crucible where Mark Selby really came good. And I want to bring up a previous point I made about that session to spare that he had, that night off that he had against Mark Williams. Had that gone close, would Mark Selby have had enough in the tank to really be playing on for 5 snookers at the end of the day at 1:45, when potentially, you know, I'd say every other player in the draw would have probably conceded at that point.
Yeah.
You know, did that extra session off, little bit fresher going into the semi-final and final. Just give him that little bit extra going into those key evening sessions where he could play his game, his torture game, where he really tries to tie everything up. Just an interesting point.
It is an interesting point. I don't quite know what to think, to be honest. I completely get your point, and no, it is a valid one. I think in some ways yes, in some ways maybe not. But no, it is a very good point to make. But going back to your original point, as you say, it was the camel that, you know, whatever.
The straw that broke the camel's back.
That's it. See, there we go. I've never been great at all that, but oh well. But it was the second session. It really was that did it for Murphy. But that being said, it could have been so different in that last session. You know, Murphy had won 2 in a row. It was 17-13, and Murphy won 2 to bring it back closer at 17-15. Went for what I think was a stupid red on the cushion.
Yeah.
And
you know, when you wouldn't take it on in Snooker 19, that it's a silly shot.
Yeah, you're right there. But, you know, it was... Yeah, I just looked at this and I thought, well, this is really all or nothing. And my heart sank after that because I just knew it was all over for Sean Murphy.
Yeah, Selby made a meal of the final black, which I'm sure we'll get to. But it was sad to see the match come to an end. But I think that's a testament to how good the match was. I think in previous years, maybe you were happy that the match was over because, you know, I think for when Trump beat Higgins, you didn't really see Higgins coming back from that. But I could genuinely see Murphy getting back into it if he won that frame. But hey, that's the way the cookie crumbles at the end of the day. But I'm looking at a couple of key frames here, and one of them was very, very early on in the final, and Sean Murphy was 2-0 up at the very start of the match, and in frame 3 he makes a break of 65, and then Mark Selby manages to win that frame by 3 points in the end to get his first frame on the board. And I just wonder how different the match may have played out had Murphy went 3-0 up, because, you know, if we're looking at all of this technically, it would have been a 6-2 session 1 lead if all the other frames played out the way they were, and it would have been 17-16 instead of 18-15 right at the end. Of course, now, you know, everything plays out different if Murphy wins that frame, but there's a few little occasions in the match where Murphy could and probably should have won a frame, and I think that's where the final was lost. The other one I wanted to pick out was frame 2 of the third session, so it was in the afternoon, and Sean Murphy's faced with a black to the middle pocket. And I don't know if you were watching at this point, but he rolls it, and it looks like it's going in, but it just turns off right at the end, and he leaves it over the pocket for Mark Selby. Now, if that goes in, we're looking at 17-16 the other way to Sean Murphy, and it just shows those tiny little moments in the match completely change the outcome, and the outcome of the whole tournament in this case.
Frightening to think, isn't it, over a near 12-hour period, that those little occasions can change things. But I think that, reference your first comment of 6-2 in the first session, you know what, I don't think that would have mattered. I just think that Selby had got that one big session in him. You know, even if he was 6-2 up at 7-2, it would have still been 9.
Well, it would have been 9-8 going into the last day, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would have been, but I think Selby had got the lead, so I think if Selby's got the lead, I can't see him giving it up from there, to be true. So, I think Murphy, yes, the second session was a big one, but ultimately he needed to have won then the third session. You know, he was 3 frames back going into the evening enough. And I think we all knew that unless there was a big shock, it was all over. But it was nice to see, and I think that we were glad that it was such a good match. Because remember, last year was an absolute battering by Ronnie. The previous year, Judd Trump beat John Higgins fairly easily. You know, it's been the closest one since that match, of course, in 2018 that Willow won. So it is always much better when you get a final that's close. There's nothing worse than... I mean, I wasn't massively bothered about the final, but there's nothing worse than if you get a final, like the Ronnie one in some ways, that was so one-sided that the tournament's almost over before it's finished, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and, you know, I was speaking to Tom Mayhew about this, actually, and in Crucible history, there's only actually ever been 3 deciding frames in a final, which I find completely baffling. And, you know, generally we do see very one-sided matches, but Mark Selby seems to like to make a bit of a meal of it. All of his matches 18-14 or closer. But no, it was a great final, and you know, as you say, maybe it wouldn't have made the difference. I think what made the ultimate difference was Selby winning the last 4 frames of the evening session. Up to that point, it was sort of, you have one frame, I'll take the other. I'll take another one, you take that one. It was 7-all, I think, and or 7-6 to Murphy, and Selby won the next 4 frames to lead 10-7, and I think that's the straw that broke the camel's back, as you say. And yeah, but it was a really good final, and I think it was really well covered. In general, I was a little bit disappointed that it was John or Dennis rather than both of them covering the final session. You know, the last we heard of Dennis in commentary was the afternoon session, and I feel, you know, there's been a lot of talk about it. We talked a little bit about it in the last podcast. But sort of talking about the tournament in general, how did you feel it was covered by the media, social media, BBC, Eurosport? I don't know if you caught any Eurosport.
Yeah, let's just pass on the Eurosport bit. But it was really good to see Hazel back.
Yes,
I think
that was a massive bonus for all involved that Hazel was back.
Yeah, definitely. I think Alan McManus has just increased his stature as the best pundit on TV. And, you know, the BBC have got such a good team. It's just got such a different vibe. If we talk about Jack Lazowski and Judd Trump going in there, that was a surprise. I quite like Jack Lazowski as a pundit, I have to say. I thought he would, you know, he was quite a good pundit, and of course commentated with Alan McManus. I'm going to be honest, I think they pushed the Judd Trump issue a little bit too much. You know, he was commentating on quite a few sessions. I just didn't think we needed that so much.
Well, I think it's all right having him in for 1 or 2, but he was in for the afternoon session of the final day, which is quite a big gig at the end of the day. I agree with you about Alan McManus, and you said it earlier in the tournament, that you see Alan McManus potentially being the long-term replacement of John and Dennis, and I couldn't agree more. And I think BBC are very much nurturing him into that role. You know, very rarely was Angles with Taylor or Virgo. He was very much the lead commentator with Lazowski or with Trump or with Parrott.
And I don't think it would work. I just don't see that dynamic working between John and it's not because of the two people, but because they're just both naturally lead commentators. I mean, I'm not too overly keen on Stephen Hendry as a commentator. They had Joe Perry in again, and I wasn't massively keen on that. But I think John Parrott, Steve Davis, Alan McManus, I mean, I'm not too sure about Rob Walker, but if it's an option over some of the
Dave Farrar
commentators, then sure. But I tell you what, it was funny, wasn't it? I think it was on finals day. They showed a compilation of stuff from last year, and God, remembering Dave Farrar's commentary again. Let's hope that never happens again. But I just think that BBC cover it so well, and really bolsters the argument for free-to-air sport on the BBC, because nobody does it better than the BBC, and that's exactly right. I mean,
Yeah.
Ken Doherty must be absolutely cream cracker, because he must have covered every single tournament for ITV, then BBC, coming up to the end of the year. I don't know how he did that.
Yeah, he also did some stuff for Eurosport at some points as well. I mean, Ken has been a trooper, and I think he was almost the victim in the whole wave of the new generation, if you like. I feel Ken wasn't often in the sort of punditry chair as much as he used to be. He was sort of chucked in on maybe the Duff sessions, if you like, and I thought it was interesting. It was just something I noticed that Ken was pushed out a little bit from what he would have been doing. Of course, he commentated in the final session with Angles, I think it was, in the first 4 frames, and but yeah, they just had almost too many people by the end. They obviously got rid of Joe Perry by the quarterfinals, got rid of Rob Walker as well, and sort of brought in Lazowski and Trump. So you had far too many people in it. It almost got at times too many cooks spoil the broth. For me, and the fact that they were doubling up people on everything, so it was Parrott and Lazowski doing demos rather than just Parrott. It was Judd and Angles doing something else, and they were swapping in commentators after every 4 frames, which they don't usually do until the final. I wouldn't say it was a bad thing, but it just felt very overcrowded towards the end. And actually, this is the first positive thing I'm ever going to say about Judd Trump, so make sure you write it down, record it, because it's never going to happen again. But I actually didn't mind Judd Trump as a pundit or a commentator. Now, he wasn't anywhere near the sort of level of John Virgo or Angles or Ken, for instance, but I'd say he was on par with a Joe Perry for me, and I'd almost rather have Trump in there than Joe Perry, because if he's keeping people happy, if he's keeping those noisy people that are criticising snooker happy, then that makes me happy, because more people tuned into BBC this time. Even Mark Williams was tuning into BBC, and he's been very scathing of that. So I don't know. It's just a thought. I'd rather have Judd Trump in there than Joe Perry, and that's not much disrespect to Joe, but he is the world number 1 at the end of the day.
Yeah, there was some great insight, to be honest, from Judd. I'll admit that it was a little bit awkward, a little bit cagey between Judd and Steve Davis. I don't know if anybody else picked up that vibe.
Yeah. It was
after Judd's comments, but Steve Davis. And I was having a great chuckle with it was an interview with Mark Williams, and he was saying who he was and everything, and that was just a bit of a jibe at what Judd Trump had said. But I think most people don't give a toss about the coverage, to be brutally honest. But it's really a golden period for the punditry, and I think with snooker more than any other sport, commentary is such a massive element. I think of Formula One, and David Croft's not the best commentator in the world, but it's okay. With football, I mean, I can just about listen to Steve McManaman going on for 90 minutes. But with snooker, I guess golf, cricket, I guess those have the same sort of element, that you've got to have a real top-class commentator, I think.
Yeah, and I think somebody that has just got a wealth of knowledge, and that's my kind of criticism of the BBC team in a way, and just to give the other side of the argument, I think John Parrott is a terrific pundit for snooker, and I never want to see him sort of binned off the way people have suggested, but it is so incredibly apparent that he doesn't watch or doesn't keep up to date with the results throughout the season and maybe the earlier rounds of tournaments, like an avid snooker fan was. And I don't think he needs to do that, but it's difficult when they're talking about certain players, and he says the throwaway comments of, "Oh well, I've never actually seen this player play before," and people just go off it about that. So that would be my slight little criticism of the team, and I think they do miss a sort of Clive Everton and, dare I say it, Dave Hendon sort of figure of a snooker journalist that lives and breathes snooker and all the stats and this and that. Now, I'm not suggesting they go and get Dave Hendon. Not for 1 minute am I suggesting that. But they had that role with Clive Everton for many, many, many years, and they've never really replaced him. And I think that's the one ingredient for me that is missing from the BBC team.
Okay, let's give the other side of the argument. Right, I know we're going on an incredible tangent, but let's go for it. Is snooker outside of the big events worth watching? I.e., is John Parrott and the rest of us spending our time watching the smaller tournaments worth it? Because I think, I tell you what, I'll let you answer first, but I think there's one big thing that restricts that answer.
Well, for me, it would be worth watching, which I think ITV have proved over the years. It would be worth watching if the production was good and the
thank God you said that.
The quality of the visuals were good and the quality of the coverage and the actually access, which I know they're trying to do with Matchroom Live, but the fact that people had to access Jimmy White versus Stephen Hendry by an app. We said that before.
Matchroom Live's a waste of time because you can only watch the tournaments that aren't televised as such on Matchroom Live. So you couldn't go and watch the Worlds on Matchroom Live, which you didn't need to because everything was available on the BBC. But for instance, I don't know, let's just put out there European Masters, let's say, because it's televised on Eurosport. Unless I'm in a different country, I can't watch it on Matchroom Live. So that really means diddly squat. And it's just when you see how well the BBC cover it, and you might think their punditry, their commentary is not the best, but nevertheless, the access is impeccable. If you want to watch any match, you can watch it, and I think they do exactly the same at any tournament. Exactly, that they have a good highlights show, whereas when there's a match on, you've got Eurosport showing bleeding cycling highlights. I mean, I know it's not a dedicated snooker channel, but then BBC 2 isn't, and BBC 4 isn't. And
exactly.
And that's why take the TV coverage on? I mean, this is something good I can say for Sky, because they have dedicated channels towards all of their different sports, and if anything, they show too much of the bloody F1 and the football and the cricket and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem with a dedicated channel. Good enough. That's the problem with a dedicated channel, and this is a discussion for a totally different time, but with Sky Sports F1, for instance, you just get repeat after repeat, and it's absolute tripe unless it's Grand Prix weekend. And that's kind of the problem with that idea, and that's, I think, the problem that Sky have, that they don't have a breadth of coverage when there's not live sport on.
I wouldn't worry with how much they're being paid.
Yeah, I know. But you look at BBC, and that's what drives me up the wall when people complain that they take a match off and put it on the red button. It's not a dedicated snooker channel. It's not a dedicated sport channel. It's a television channel, and as it is funded by the British public, I think it would be wrong for them to just put wall-to-wall snooker coverage on there, because people have a right to watch Eggheads if they want to at 6 o'clock. That snooker's already taken up from 10 till 6 or whatever it is on the BBC. It's just one of those things. I think it is something that I think that's where snooker is lacking, really, and that's the access argument. And John Parrott might not pay for Eurosport. Maybe he
can't. Who does pay for Eurosport?
Yeah,
I wonder who does actually just pay for Eurosport. I think the majority of people must just get it through their Sky.
Exactly. I know certainly if you're a Freeview viewer, you can pay extra for Eurosport.
No, I'll pass. Thanks.
But yeah, it's it's crazy where we are at, and I think it really did champion how good the BBC are at covering live sport. And I even noticed it earlier this year watching ITV. They don't show any replays of anything. They don't show any slow-mos. They obviously they have adverts between every frame. So even though ITV, trustatrader.com, although ITV's coverage for me is leaps and bounds ahead of budget-style Eurosport.
Well, it used to be. It used to be, but then they
got a lot of the
they
a lot of the
numpties,
as Roddy would call
staff.
them. Yeah.
It just
because ITV had Clive Everton, and I keep talking about Clive Everton, but they did. They had Clive Everton. They had. They were the first one to have Angles commentating. Yeah. They had Foulds, they had Hendry, they had Doherty. That was a fantastic team of individuals, and now it's just become kind of Eurosport Volume 2, where I think if Eurosport's coverage was all like ITV's coverage, it would be very bearable. I don't think there's any argument about that. It would be very bearable coverage and very decent coverage. ITV have the other problem. They don't show the other matches like the BBC do. And it's just...
don't get me started on that.
It's just crazy. It's absolutely crazy that people complain about the BBC and about the standard of the BBC coverage when they're getting every single shot of the championship covered live on your phone, on your laptop, on your TV, on the actual television. It is just crazy for me. It's unbelievable how people can complain about that.
Yeah.
But that's the way it goes, I suppose. But we've talked a lot about the coverage. I think overall it was a very positive step for both the BBC, and I think Eurosport had their viewers. I know that a lot of people were happy with Eurosport's coverage as well. Those who chose to watch it, and that's absolutely fine if that's your choice and that's your preference. You of course have the right to do that. But overall it was a really fantastic tournament, and I think. For me, was the tournament of the season. It's easy to say about the World Championship because it's the longest, but I genuinely think all of the top players seemed to be up for it. There was a lot of great matches in there. There was 105 century breaks or something like that. So that just shows what a standard of snooker we had. And the only thing we actually missed out on, for me, was a 147. But hey, it doesn't happen every year.
No, you're right, and we got near to one a few times, but like all these things, you can't have everything.
Yeah, you can't, and I, for one, certainly can't wait for next year's World Snooker Championship. And of course, we will be back with our previews and reviews for that when the time comes next year between the 16th of April and the 2nd of May. I believe tickets are already on sale. The finals sold out. So you can go and buy your tickets for next year when hopefully everything will be back to normal. And actually, just to finish off here, because we haven't talked about it, but crowds back at snooker, how did you feel about that? I can't believe we've not spoke about it.
We haven't, no, and that just shows how they just faded into normalness, I guess. Yeah. After a bit, it was a bit of a novelty at the start, but it was handled so well by WST, and that they added a real atmosphere to it, to some of the matches, and of course the laughter with the commentary. And I'm sure there was a few moments we missed. I don't think there were any loud noises with Virgo saying I think the kettle's boiled or anything that this year, but it's just another element, and it's great to see crowds back. And I think actually that's maybe one of the reasons we demerit the Eurosport coverage, because the tournaments aren't so big, and because we haven't had fans as well. It's just a double whammy there, isn't it, if not a triple whammy.
But I think we've said it before with Eurosport, and I promise this will be my final dig at them, but they seem to turn down the ambient volume. For whatever reason, you can't hear the actual match and the crowd and the ref as much as you can on the BBC. And I think it shows how much you actually why you're so immersed in the action when all of those noises are level with John Virgo's voice. I can hear a cough in the audience. I can hear Paul Collier talking, to Sean Murphy about this, that, or the other. Yeah, I don't know. It's just one of those things, and I think it really added to the atmosphere. And hey, I don't think we'd have seen Sean Murphy in the final had they not been there. If I'm being brutally honest.
So how did we see Mark Selby in the final? Oh, it's a funny one, isn't it? But yeah, I agree. Murphy, Bingham, etc. I think they all thrived with a crowd, and hopefully that's something that's back for good now.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it will be. Strangely enough, the next bit of snooker that's on the telly is still at the Crucible. It is going to be the World Seniors starting tomorrow as I'm recording this. Probably when you're watching this or listening to this, it's already been and gone. But the World Seniors, of course, and there's going to be no crowd for that. So it's sort of that massive juxtaposition of going from full capacity crowd to nobody watching. But we're nearly there. A few months down the line, the calendar was released today, which sort of gave an indication of we're going to get back to more normality next season. I think anyone that thinks we're going to be fully back to normal in the 2021 to 22 season is a fool, quite honestly. But hopefully by the next season, so 22 to 23, we'll hopefully see snooker going back out of China, going back out to Riga, Saudi Arabia, wherever you want to go, and hopefully we'll see a lot more snooker played around the world, and a lot more crowds at events, and just hopefully getting back to normal, and hopefully a new snooker game as well. That would be really nice, wouldn't it?
Here, exactly. I couldn't agree more.
But I've certainly not got a lot more to say about the tournament. I apologise to the listeners for getting so irate about the coverage, but it's something that I think we're both very passionate about, and it's something that's very topical at the moment. So I think it's important to get our views out there and show that it's not just defund the BBC movement, basically. But thank you very much to listening to this coverage of the World Snooker Championship. We were really, really chuffed to see how well the preview did. And hey, if this video does even half as well, it will have done really, really well. So thank you very much for your support with it. Hey, we want all the views. Yeah. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk about it, and we're not just going to be talking about snooker. Of course, there's a lot of stuff that will be going on over the next 12 months before the next World Championship, and we promise you that won't be the last podcast until then. We will be talking about other things. F1 is certainly very interesting at the moment, and I'm sure we'll get much more exciting as we go through, and I'm sure there's a lot of snooker topics that we will talk about, as well as any other sport as well. So make sure that if you're on Spotify, you give us a follow, and if you're on YouTube, give us a subscribe, and turn the notifications on so that you don't miss another podcast. Any final thoughts, Toby?
I don't think so, or else we could go into another 20-minute debate on Eurosport. I don't think anybody wants that.
No, nobody wants that.
But, yeah.
Sorry, Dave. If you're listening. We love you, really. We love you, really.
Yeah, whatever. But, I completely agree with what you said there, Joe. Anybody still listening, thank you very much for your company today, and we really enjoy doing this. We're really glad to be back podcasting, so... It's a privilege for us, and hopefully it's a joy to listen to. Debatable, but hopefully it's enjoyable.
If anyone's listening out there right now,
say hello.
Yeah, say hello down in the comments section. I tell you what, let's get them to write something in the comments. That's what cool YouTubers do, isn't it? So,
oh dear, don't do that.
If you are listening,
based on who comments,
if you are listening to this part of the video, comment down below Snooker Loopy. And we'll just have a secret club of people that know what that means. So thank you very much for listening. We'll see you on the next podcast. Goodbye, everyone.